Welcome to the Roetzel HealthLaw HotSpot. HealthLaw HotSpot is a podcast for physicians and health professionals that covers the legal issues and trends that affect the healthcare industry.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the HealthLaw HotSpot. Today, I'm joined by two of my partners, and we're going to be talking about a really interesting topic, which is some of the many questions that we're receiving from our clients, including medical practices, dental practices, and others, about how to handle PPP loans and some of the questions and issues that arise in terms of their day-to-day practices and transactions they might want to do. Let me make the introduction so you're familiar with everyone. My name is Ericka Adler. I'm a partner at Roetzel and Andrus, and I run the healthcare practice. I'm joined by David Hochman, who's also part of the healthcare practice, and he's the partner in charge of our Chicago office. And our very special guest today is one of our shareholders, Donna Hartl. She is a CPA, a lawyer, and she does both tax work and estate planning at Roetzel and Andrus. Thank you so much, everybody, for getting together today. I know this is an incredibly hot topic, and every single day almost I get some email or question about PPP. I know enough to be dangerous, but I'd like to make sure that I'm passing it over to the experts of the world, which include Donna. And so what I really want to kind of talk about amongst ourselves is what are some of the questions that we're hearing from clients, and what kind of advice would we want to share with them today about some things they should be thinking about or who they should be talking to as these questions arise. So why don't we start, first of all, Donna, why don't you just give us a little bit of update on what's going on. I heard that there's another round of PPP money out there. Who should be applying for that? Are you seeing a lot of people applying? And is there anything we need to know about that?
Sure. It is being known affectionately as PPP2, and the rounds that went around last year are known as PPP1. And what happened was at the end of December, they decided that they were going to allow people to apply for a second round of monies, and that's PPP2. PPP2 is only available to people who have applied for a PPP1. So if the first question is, but I never did apply for a PPP1, what do I do? They've extended that. So both programs, PPP1 and PPP2, are eligible to be applied for through March 31st of this year. So if you didn't go for PPP1, you can go now. And if you did, you can go for a second round of PPP2. PPP2 has some different rules. Some of the rules are the same, such as you're going to be applying for 2.5 times your payroll for the amount, but this time it's capped at $2 million. And then you also have to demonstrate a 25% or more drop in your gross receipts for any calendar quarter in 2020 as compared to 2019. Or a 25% dip in gross receipts for all of 2020 compared to 2019. And if you qualify for that, then you can apply for a PPP2 so long as you can certify that you've spent all your PPP1 monies or will spend all of your PPP monies on eligible expenses, which has been defined as an array of expenses that they keep adding onto, but it includes such things as mortgage interest, as utilities, as PPE supplies, utilities, accounting software if it's used for online services. And there's a list that we can share that they keep posting and keep adding to.
So I guess, one question, you and I had this with a client last week. They're doing pretty well now. They got the PPP1, and the question came up, should they be applying for PPP2? And I don't know if this is like an ethical issue or, I guess when it comes down to it, you could meet the requirements of using, of having had your revenue drop and meeting that 25% requirement, et cetera. And is that it? So if you're doing great, you're back to normal, maybe you're even better than normal now, but in 2020, you did have that loss. What is the risk of somebody taking on that number, or is it really just a black and white question of numbers?
It's not a black and white question of numbers, because where the catch-all is, you have to certify when you apply that you have a need or a perceived need because you're concerned about how the pandemic is affecting your business. They have narrowed that a little bit with PPP2 because you have to have that drop in gross receipts to demonstrate. But yes, some clients have done better or were not harmed during 2020, though many were. I think it's really a test of, do you feel you really are concerned? Because it's how you feel at the time you apply. And if you still feel you're concerned about needing some assistance with your business and you can support, if questioned, that certification, then go ahead. What's the risk? The risk is that the SBA may not approve your loan. The risk could be that more than likely, after the loan has been funded, the SBA says, based on your numbers, you really shouldn't have made that certification, and they can call it back. I can tell you, I have not seen any of that. So the risk would be paying it back.
Is that the only risk? Like, you don't get in trouble criminally or anything like that, do you?
There's been talk about that with PPP1, but as time goes on, it seems to ease up that the likelihood is less unless it's egregious. But there has been no real testing of the case. There has been one citation in a different state where somebody was accused of fraud, but fraud is different than just not needing it. So right now there isn't enough guidance on it. And so we just tell people, if you're going to certify it, have in your files the reason you think that certification is correct. So if we have to pull it up later, if questioned, we can.
So Donna, are you finding a lot of differences in how banks are handling PPP loan applications? It seems like the SBA is not an agency that gets a lot of publicity, but they've been in the highlight in this PPP program 1 and 2. But it seems like they make the rules up as they go. And there were a lot of changes with PPP1 loans after the program was first announced.
I think that the banks in general are a little better and more consistent. In the PPP1 round, it was very difficult because different banks were taking different positions. I have seen that now with PPP2 as well, but part of it is SBA too. SBA has put in verification questions now when they are examining within their portal, and that is delaying things. Certain lenders are making decisions. I heard about today that they're making a decision, some lenders, that they will not take a PPP2 application if the PPP1 loan forgiveness application has not been submitted. That is not an SBA requirement, or at least not yet. So ultimately, you always have to talk actively with your lender about all these questions as well, because we can advise you so far, but if the lender has their own requirement, you'll have trouble getting past that. So you need to make sure they're on board with whatever you want to do.
So when it comes time to talking with the lender, I personally don't deal with lenders. I'm not a banking lawyer, but one area where we are or at least I am kind of getting involved with talking to lenders has to do with transactions. So you're buying a physician practice, you're selling a physician practice, a dental practice, you're having somebody become a shareholder or a member, owner, fully, partially, etc. All of these different variations seem to trigger the PPP amounts. And I think early on, before there was more guidance, people kind of went ahead and did it. And I don't know what kind of consequences they may face, but now there is guidance, and the guidance, is something that people may or may not be aware of. I urge everybody watching this that might have that issue arise to talk to your lawyer, talk to your lender, and of course, talk to your accountant as well. And hopefully one of those three will give you the right guidance, but maybe you can kind of speak to, what should our clients out there who are doing any kind of internal or external transaction be thinking about and remembering when it comes to these PPP loans?
Sure, that was a hot topic for most of 2020 because that was an area that kept evolving as far as guidance goes. If you have a PPP loan that is outstanding and has not yet been forgiven, if you are looking to sell all or part of your business, whether it is assets or stock, you need to check with your lender, because the SBA has finally came out with rules last year that talked about it. And the rules are tiered. The rules are different. What you need to do depends on whether you're selling stock or assets. What you need to do is different depending on the amount of what you're selling and how much control you're giving up. So you will almost always need lender consent if you're selling more than 20%. And to get lender consent or to get SBA consent if required, you're usually going to need one of two things. You're neither going to need SBA consent, which then has to go through the lender to get, or you need to set up an escrow with the lender, typically equal to the amount of the loan plus 1% interest. But the exact parameters of when you need to set it up, with who you set it up, and whether or not consent is absolutely required is all set forth in the SBA guidance. So you should check with whoever attorney is doing your sale or your transition for you, and check with your lender, because they should be able to walk you through the guidance and let you know exactly what needs to be done. But because that guidance is out there and that guidance is clear, the one thing we do not recommend is going ahead and selling without complying with the guidance, because you don't want the loan to be called in too soon. You don't want the loan to not be forgiven.
What about if you have that forgiveness letter already? Or you've told, sometimes you get an email saying you have been forgiven, but you didn't actually get the letter yet. So how does that play into it?
I like to be conservative. Unless I've got it confirmed that it's forgiven, I would still comply with the rules as if it's not forgiven yet.
Yeah, we had an interesting situation. One of our clients was selling his practice, and he had gotten a PPP loan from a non-traditional bank, not a brick and mortar bank, because the SBA broadened the category of lenders who could participate in the PPP program. This lender had no way to set up an escrow. And we had to delay the sale for a couple of weeks until we got our forgiveness letter, because there wasn't any other option that would comply with the SBA guidance.
Yeah, I think part of the advice of what to do when you run into those situations is look at the timing involved. If we can get around some of the problems by just postponing a week or two, as long as that does not hurt you, that's probably the better option. But if you're talking about we would have to wait 6 months before we could resolve, then we're going to have to work through the rules.
Right. So what kind of questions or issues are you seeing that are, things to be aware of? David and I get questions, but obviously you're much more involved. Are there any red flags or unique problems that you may not have anticipated that have come up?
Yes, I've actually seen two, more than two, but the two that we can mention that are kind of applicable here are for PPP2, what is gross receipts? While you think that should be a simple question, it is far from a simple question. The SBA just a few weeks ago put out guidance of how to determine gross receipts for the 25% drop in gross receipts test. And they tied it to lines on a tax return, which then makes it very clear and very helpful for people to decide what's counted and what's not. So I would refer people to that guidance, or you can call us and we can help you work through that. The second question, which is coming up quite often and is an ever-changing landscape, is, well, that's great for PPP. I know what to do with PPP, but I also have HHS monies. I also have EIDL monies. I also have Medicare Advance monies. And now the IRS has, or they recently agreed that you can start taking employee retention credits where you couldn't take those before. Since many of those programs all involve money for payroll, how do they all interplay with each other? Because logically, you know the government's not going to let you take credit for that same employee's payroll 4 times. So where you need us and where you need your accountants is to help you be creative. We are advising many clients, don't rush for your PPP forgiveness yet until we figure out which payroll we want to put on the PPP forgiveness, which payroll we want to use for the employee retention credits. How does Medicare Advance play into that? And the HHS monies that you have to report how you use them. You can't use the same payroll to the same person for the same period twice. But since, if you think of that as a Venn diagram, they all converge at one point, but then all the programs have other income or other expenses you can use for their program. So it's actually a pretty creative endeavor to make sure you can maximize the use of all 4 of those programs by figuring out which expenses should go against which grant or loan.
So I guess since this advice is relatively more recent than, some of the loans or grants that were made way back in the spring and summer, how are people going to be impacted that didn't have this information at the time? I guess, do they have to kind of go back and reassess? They may have already gotten forgiveness. Quite a lot of our clients have gotten forgiveness already. So how does that play into things?
Depends on which part we're talking about. For the PPP loans, they used to subtract from your forgiveness the amount of your EIDL loan, which was like 10,000 or less. They came out and said, we'll give that back to you. I don't recall if they figured out how yet, but they will. So make sure that if you have already received forgiveness, but the EIDL money was subtracted from your forgiveness amount, you can get that back. For PPP-1 monies that you either gave back because you were worried about being eligible for all of it, or you didn't apply for all you're eligible, you can actually go back for the PPP-1 monies you didn't get before. For HHS, most of your reporting isn't coming up until right now or shortly thereafter. So you still have time to figure out between PPP and HHS monies how you're going to allocate the expenses to which buckets. And because with the latest round of laws and IFRs and FAQs, you can now have additional expenses towards PPP you didn't before. You may want to rethink, if you haven't applied yet for forgiveness, of putting more non-payroll expenses towards PPP so you can use those same payroll expenses better for either HHS or for the employee retention credit. So the one advice I'd like people to come away with is don't rush to get that forgiveness or to get the reporting, because you want to make sure you're maximizing how you're getting reimbursed or credit for all your expenses across all the categories.
Donna, you want to talk a little bit about the changes that have recently occurred in the ability to deduct expenses that you paid with the proceeds of a PPP loan, because that's sort of was an ongoing saga for months.
It was an ongoing saga, and the people who wanted the result that finally came out won. What happened was when PPP first came out, they said that when the loan is forgiven, you won't have to include forgiven loan monies in your income, because otherwise forgiven loan monies under general tax rules, it's always considered income. But for PPP forgiveness, it's not. And then the IRS came out and said, okay, But if you paid expenses with those forgiven monies, you don't get to deduct them too, because the IRS considered it double dipping. There was a lot of backlash to that, and a lot of pressure on Congress, a lot of pressure on the SBA, saying it wasn't fair because those expenses should be deductible in any event. There was enough pressure that the SBA came out and SBA came out and said, yeah, you're right. They will be deductible. And then the IRS gave a retraction to that and said that we will allow the expenses. So now what happens is, whether or not your PPP loan is forgiven or not, the expenses you use to pay with those PPP monies will be deductible for sure in the year you paid them.
Wow. So this is
that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, that's big. And this is a complicated topic. I mean, the average doctor, average dentist, average business owner, I mean, this is a lot to take in. I mean, I haven't managed to stay on top of all this, not my area, but even for you, it's a vast amount of information to have to process, and it keeps changing. So
and it changes daily.
Really?
It really changes daily.
So really, for our clients, David, they really need to be talking to someone like Donna and making sure that whenever they're addressing it, if they're doing a sale now, or they're filing their taxes now, or they're trying to get forgiveness on the HHS money, that they are really taking this into account and not just trying to do it themselves, which I know many of them do, which is fine, but there could be a bad outcome if you're not really aware of
Right.
how to do it properly.
If we could just save them with just one idea about, oh no, put this expense on PPP and put the payroll on employee retention credit, any one idea will likely well save them the accounting and attorney's fees to do so.
Yeah, I agree. The interplay between the HHS money, the PPP funds, and the ERC, very complicated. And it's not one size fits all.
Right. So this is something that you really need expert help on. Thanks for being our expert today, Donna.
You are quite welcome.
All right. Well, any last thoughts? I think we've covered so much here. I don't want, to go into too much detail. It can be really overwhelming. This is a lot of helpful information. Any last thoughts on this topic? Either one of you?
Well, my last thought is don't be afraid to reach out to your attorneys, your accountants, and your lender, because we're the people who are trying to stay on top of all the rules. The professionals, the doctors, the dentists, they have what they need to do. Trying to keep up on the rules is what we do and how we can help you. And so don't be afraid to ask. Don't assume to question is too trivial. And if you learned an answer to something last month from somebody, don't assume the rule hasn't changed, because it's changing daily.
And don't rely on Google for all your
answers. Don't rely on Google.
And don't be put off taking advantage of these programs because you think they're too complicated. That's what your advisors are for. And as Donna said, that it's an opportunity to get some funds that will help the economic welfare of your business and help you be able to weather the adverse effect of the pandemic.
Right.
So if you have questions, Donna is a great resource.
Thanks, guys. That's great advice. I hope you'll come back and talk about other topics in your area of expertise, because this has been really helpful. Well, thanks everyone for joining the HealthLaw HotSpot, and we'll see you next time. Please reach out to any of us with questions that you might have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Roetzel HealthLaw HotSpot is made available by the firm and its attorneys for educational purposes and to provide general information, not to provide specific legal advice. Use of the Roetzel HealthLaw HotSpot does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and the firm or any of its attorneys. The Roetzel HealthLaw HotSpot should not be used as a substitute for competent legal advice, and you should contact an attorney in your state about any legal needs or questions you may have.